Going to go ahead and officially get started. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Karika Thompson. I am the Chief Development Officer here at Inner City Law Center, and we are so glad to have you join us for this very important conversation. We here at Inner City Law Center have started doing these community conversations last year to really have an opportunity to discuss different topics and issues that are very relevant and prevalent in the housing, homelessness, and unhoused space. And so today's topic is women in the military, really discussing and getting into the legal challenges that our women veterans face after service. And so just first, in case some of you, this is your first ICLC event or you haven't heard about us before, just wanted to share that we are a nonprofit poverty law firm located in the Skid Row area of Los Angeles, and we really work to ensure that individuals, families, homeless veterans, and others struggling with housing instability receive access to decent, safe, and affordable housing by providing free legal services to folks. We have been around since 1980 and continue to do the work of providing free legal services and helping those who are really in need. I want to remind everyone just a few Zoom reminders that this is a webinar. And so for all of you wonderful guests and participants here, we cannot see you. Please use the Q&A portion of the chat to ask any questions. We will start our discussion and have a moderated discussion with several questions that we put together, as well as incorporating some of the questions that have been pre-submitted with registration. And we'll still leave about 20 minutes or so at the end of the conversation to go through questions that come up during the Q&A. You are welcome to send a chat message to the host and panelists that we can see. You can use the closed caption feature if you need it. And we are recording this and we'll put it on our YouTube channel and send it out to folks afterwards as well. So without any other any other information or anything to share, I will start by introducing our moderator, Adam Murray. He is the Chief Executive Officer here at ICLC. Since becoming our CEO in 2007, he's led ICLC's growth from a small 5-attorney organization into a nationally respected leader in the housing and homelessness advocacy space, which is now supported by more than over 150 staff and 700 volunteers. He's a recognized expert on housing and homelessness, and he has led ICLC in advancing innovative legal strategies and public policies that prevent homelessness and expand access to safe, affordable housing. He serves on several statewide and legal aid boards and has taught economics and poli-sci at East LA College. And prior to joining ICLC, he was a litigator. He holds a degree from Pomona College, Claremont Graduate University, and UC Berkeley School of Law. So welcome, Adam. Take it away.
Thanks, Karika. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you for this conversation about women in the military, women veterans here at Inner City Law Center. I'm getting a message saying my internet connection is unstable. So Karika, let me know if I start tuning out. But we have a fabulous panel for you here today. And I have the privilege of introducing them and then asking a bunch of questions in addition to the questions from the audience, as Karika mentioned. So I'm going to jump right in to our panelists, since they are certainly the highlight for this event. First up is Caity Lynch. Caity is was an engineer officer in the Army Reserve. She served in Afghanistan, where she led 150 soldiers in constructing facilities at 4 bases throughout the country. As a student at Berkeley Law, she was part of the Veterans Law Practicum cohort that published an important report called Broken Promises: How America Deports Its Veterans and Deprives Them of Health Care and Benefits. Caity is currently a Skadden Fellow at Swords to Plowshares, which is a Bay Area nonprofit that has served veterans for over 50 years. Her practice there focuses on providing legal services to veterans seeking VA benefits, with a focus particularly on VA eligibility related to character of discharge determinations. So Caity, great to have you. Anything you want to start us off with?
No, thank you. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. Next up, we have Dr. Shana Napier. Dr. Napier is a clinical psychologist at the VA Long Beach healthcare system, where she provides care within a community-based outpatient setting and serves as a champion of women's mental health issues in particular. She's committed to creating inclusive, patient-centered spaces that recognize the diverse experiences of women veterans. She focuses her practice on trauma-informed, culturally responsive care for women veterans, with particular attention on perinatal health, complex trauma, and the intersection of caregiving and well-being. And her work includes developing and facilitating group-based interventions, supporting interdisciplinary care, and advancing access to gender-specific mental health care services for veterans. Dr. Napier, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. Next up is Inner City Law Center's very own Amanda Powell. Amanda is the supervising attorney of our homeless veterans project here at Inner City Law Center. Last year, that's a project that closed about 240 cases on behalf of veteran clients and recovered over $9.1 million for our clients. Amanda joined Inner City Law Center as a staff attorney on our homeless veterans project back in 2018 after graduating from the University of Miami School of Law. Prior to law school, Amanda worked as a victim advocate and a speech-language pathology assistant for children with autism. Amanda, anything to add at the outset here?
Nope, just excited to get started.
Great. And then last but not least is Mary Tobin. Mary, it's great to have you with us. Mary is a West Point graduate and a combat veteran who served as a communication officer for 2 tours in Iraq. She just said something that I found very amusing and fun, which was when she was describing her role there. She said, "You can talk about us, but you can't talk without us," which I found very on point. Mary is a leadership expert with 20 years of experience in leader development, operations management, community engagement, and public speaking. She served as a senior advisor at AmeriCorps, as a political appointee in the Biden-Harris administration, chief operating officer of Easter Seals back in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. She's also served as COO for the city of Jacksonville and executive director at both the Mission Continues and the Brownsville Partnership in Brooklyn, New York. Mary is currently a Hoover Institution Veteran Fellow at Stanford University. She currently serves on the board, particularly relevant for us, Black Veterans Project and the New Politics Leadership Academy. Mary is very passionate about addressing challenges in underserved communities and seeks to live by the motto, quote, service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. So I thought that quote was a great introduction to our panel here today. We're definitely talking about a group of women who have served all of us in our military and how we are doing with serving them now that they are veterans here at home. So I know this is a program generally about women in the military and women veterans, but I want to also just acknowledge that this is a law firm. You see, Law Center is a law firm, and so we're particularly focused on the legal aspects of this. And maybe ask each of you to start off, if you can say a word about or an example where you have seen lawyer or legal services making a difference in the lives of women veterans. And in no particular order, I'll just ask each of you to say something. Anybody want to jump in first?
I'll hop in here.
Great.
So first of all, Adam, thank you so much for having me a part of this esteemed panel of folks. As I'm listening to people's bios, I'm like, why am I here? I can think most immediately, not such an initial feel-good story, but I'm thinking about a young lady, a young soldier who I was mentoring, helped to mentor, and she was discharged from the Army. She had experienced MST, military sexual trauma, an assault, and in her rush to just transition from the place of trauma, she did not get the proper paperwork, discharge paperwork. She did not have the hospital documents and records and so forth that she needed. And so when she went to then the VA to petition for some benefits, she didn't have a lot of proof or evidence around the trauma that she had experienced. And I believe that she was being railroaded in a lot of ways, a problem to be moved away from this particular very historic unit. And I had a friend of mine, civilian, did not have military experience, but she was very passionate about women's issues. And I referred this young soldier to her to help advocate for her getting access to her records. Because every time this young soldier went to a doctor's office, every time she made a phone call, she had to relive and retell the same traumatic experience from the admin assistant who answered the phone to the actual, PA in the hospital, to the actual doctor, to the point where she could not physically drive herself to appointments. That lawyer, that I call her my angel, physically got in a car and would pick up this soldier and advocate for her. She would tell the story. She would oftentimes even ask the soldier, could you step outside, the veteran to step outside while I relay to the doctor or I relay to this particular VA personnel what happened to you. And that cut down on her anxiety immensely. I would say having a lawyer speak up for you, or knowing that you have a lawyer or legal advocate for you often helps move and shift some conversation. So I'm not saying that there was any pressure, but it did look like that veteran had support. So I will say that records were shifted and she got the help that she needed. And so I'm very, very grateful to organizations like these, because sometimes it's just knowing that you have some very smart legal people, lawyers who have your back. It can change the conversation. And I do believe that that is the difference between that young veteran seeing promise in her life and possibly folding into something more traumatic. So that's the first story that I thought about when you asked this question.
That's great. Dr. Napier, I saw you came off of mute. Can you add in as well?
Yes, I would have to agree with my fellow panelists. I think that validation goes far. So, what I've seen clinically is that one of the biggest barriers isn't just legal advocacy, it's getting to the point where a woman feels comfortable to seek it out at all. So many veterans, they are younger, they're employed in school, they're balancing caregiving responsibilities, and at the same time, a lot of them have experienced trauma, specifically or more often military sexual trauma. And that combination means that their identity as a survivor is often something that they've had to compartmentalize just to function from day to day. So when the woman veteran goes and seeks out legal advocacy, whether it's around discharge status or benefits or protection, it's rarely just a step. It's usually a very deliberate step, and a really difficult decision that they and often I have talked about for some time and going through a lot of the most painful parts of their life. And what I've seen make a really big difference is the moment that experience is acknowledged and believed. And I can personally say this medical legal partnership has been really special because we've had it for so long, and I can say they will believe you. We've had such a great relationship with them over time, and that has gone so far with these women veterans.
That's great. Caity?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so I mean, I agree that like even before we know if we are going to have the ultimate deliverable that a veteran is coming to seek legal advice for, being able to say like your case has merit, is a really powerful thing to be able to tell someone. But what we also get from that collectively is even cases where we realize that the law is a barrier, by continuing to work with people and seeing the ways it is a barrier, that's how we create the kind of policy advocacy that has gotten us to the point where we have changed the law for military sexual trauma in order to, connect those claims. And so it's sort of a symbiotic relationship where like we are giving them this experience from the beginning, but that's also giving us the data to be able to go back and create systemic change too.
Great. Amanda?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think there's going to be a repeated message in this, which is kind of an ongoing re-victimization that happens throughout this process. And it's something that is unique in some cases in the legal experience, but oftentimes what we see, and one case in particular that comes to top of mind is an Army veteran who served in the 70s, and she was assaulted. She later had to have what was supposed to be a minor surgery. And it ended up resulting in a full hysterectomy, which later on was determined was not a necessary like medical procedure that should have happened. And from that point forward, every time she tried to, apply for benefits, it's reliving all of that, but also the additional like, well, we don't think that would result in mental health challenges, or we don't see the value in in that hysterectomy and the long-term effects that has on your health. And it's a case that we ultimately had to take to the CAVC because every level of the VA was unwilling to kind of recognize the long-term consequences of what happened to her while she served.
So can you say, I mean, just because we have some people on the call who aren't maybe steeped in the CAVC.
Yeah, it's the Court of Veterans Appeals. So essentially, when you first bring a case, it'll be at the regional level, and then you may appeal it to the BVA, the Board of Veterans Appeals, and then beyond that, you'll appeal it to the Court of veterans appeals.
Right. So thank you for all those examples. I wanted to jump right in on the legal side since we are a legal organization and particularly focused on that. But if we can zoom out for a second, I also have a question for all of you. We have over 2 million women veterans in the country today. And if you were to identify one of the major challenges that are facing those veterans, what would you call out, or what would you want the people listening to this panel to be aware of? Why don't we go in reverse order? We'll start with you, Amanda.
Yeah. In very broad picture, more relatable spaces, I think the most feedback that I get from clients is that there isn't a lot of space in which they feel that they can relate, right? Veteran spaces don't always feel safe, and civilian spaces with other women, they don't feel understood. So I think it's a really big challenge to find a belonging post-service for women veterans.
Great. Caity?
Yeah, I agree. Like isolation is, something I was gonna say is that, more than half of all veterans are 65 or older. They didn't serve with women in the ways that a lot of younger women veterans, it's like having to go into a veteran space and having somebody process their own experience, which might be very real for them, but doesn't necessarily make me feel welcome as like a peer, is really challenging. And so I'm very picky about like the veteran spaces I even go to personally for that reason. As well as then on the civilian side, having, experiences that are unrelatable, sometimes because, the people who are most willing to ask about military experiences kind of have a predetermined idea of like a Saving Private Ryan story they want. And it can be really hard to share like your more ambiguous true experience and then just have that drop and then have that, connection get dropped. Like people don't know what to do with that. And so, yeah, I think isolation is this kind of double-headed front between the civilian reasons we're not understood in the civilian world and, not understood within the military and veterans community.
And Dr. Napier?
Sure. I actually think flexibility on behalf of the providers in the hospital can be a challenge. And what I mean is that historically we've had these models where if a woman veteran wanted to seek out mental health care, they might be asked to attend a 12-week group. And then after that 12-week group, then they could access individual therapy. And maybe it had to be in person as well. So we know that our women veterans are one of the most diverse veteran groups, period. And so to potentially leave work or school and travel, we're in Los Angeles, all the traffic, big parking lot at Long Beach VA, walk that distance, and they may have some other physiological challenges as well. Thinking about the physical space of what the VA might represent in relation to their trauma and still being a very male dominated environment, attend a 90-minute group and then do it all in reverse, right? We know that our women tend to have more caregiving responsibilities. That can be a challenge. So an example is I facilitate a rose group for our pregnant veterans. And there may be times when someone has to go off camera because they're nursing their baby. That's okay. And that makes sense. That's what we're here for. They may have other children in the background. And so I think historically we've had these models of like perfect mental health care where there's just the provider and the veteran in this like isolated space, but really matching these women with what their lifestyle looks like.
Mary, what would you lift up?
I think the ladies covered it. I mean, I was looking at Dr. Napier when I was thinking about how many, unfortunately, allegedly, I'm old now. I'm over 40, allegedly, which means that all of my peer group are now lieutenant colonels and they're colonels, which is ridiculous because they were the old people when I was in the military. No, but allegedly, I'm one of them. And what I'm seeing with my peer group, especially the women that I call sisters, they are now being late diagnosed ADHD. Their depression and anxiety is now being expanded just beyond the time in combat. Now people are starting to ask them questions about their childhood or maybe their first marriage or their experience of raising children. And so there is kind of this lack of expansion on all of those things that may come together to shape a picture of your mental health. And my friends are getting help outside of the military care system. My retired friends are getting the greatest help from support groups. and peer groups outside of, they're going on women's retreats and they're doing ayahuasca and they're doing all these things that are not necessarily available to them through the VA, but I see it on the periphery. There are VA scholars and academics who are talking about the benefits and the merits of it. So I just hope those things are coming. But when I see my sister friends and my officer sisters who are, and my NTO sisters who are going to these very alternative solutions or healthcare benefits, it for me, it makes me think, man, I was very compartmentalized when I was in. You have depression because you were in Iraq. Can't possibly be the trauma I endured in my childhood that I probably also brought into my experience. And so I definitely think that there's this women as they experience isolation, and women veterans as they experience isolation in some veteran spaces or military spaces, they're also trying to figure out how this military experience relates and fits into their entire picture. And I will say I've had a very interesting time figuring that out as well. And so I have sought out alternative methodologies while treating my bad back and my bad knee. So I just wanted to build on all the amazing things that the other panelists said.
Yeah, I was going to summarize some of what they had said, Mary, but I don't think I need to. I think you hit on that, so that's perfect. Let me ask you and Caity a question because on the last point you mentioned, which is sort of the transition from service into being in the civilian world. About, I think it's 2/3 or almost 2/3 of women veterans report that being a difficult transition, that they don't feel prepared for that they have some challenges with that. So I'm wondering if you two would be willing to share a bit from your own experience about that transition. Are there things that you saw or that you experienced that you think might be useful as we're thinking about this system overall, to inform how we think about it? Maybe Caity, you want to start us off with that?
Yeah, and I think I was in the reserve, and so I think there is one thing I want to point out is I think there's this idea that like you have this full-time job and all these other things that you're going back to. But like when I was in, 40% of the Guard and Reserve was unemployed or underemployed. And so, there like I did not have another job. I was just going on orders for years and years and years as a way to collect a paycheck. And that is like there is just enough work to do that. And so I really struggled after my deployment to Afghanistan. I came home. I think it's really hard to come back and know that you're different and also wanting to be the person that everybody is welcoming home and happy to see, and not knowing how to do that was really hard. And I, didn't know how to apply for VA benefits. I was originally like denied because I applied when I was on leave. So I was technically still on active duty, but it's like, but I'm going to be off leave in like a week. But I still had to start the process over again. And so even while I was in the reserve, I walked into a VA 6 months after I got back and didn't even make it through like the physical to start. I just broke down and was like, I don't know what's happening to me. And so like I was very lucky that because I was in the reserve, I was able to start getting VA care while I was still in the military. Um, but yeah, I think it was, really hard to just kind of, I think, especially with the war on terror, where life is going on in the United States and, and you come home totally changed, but it's not really relevant to like everyone's day-to-day life. So that was weird for me, even in the reserve.
Mary, what would you add?
Yeah, when I thought about this question, I was thinking, I was definitely full time, and I took for granted how much the military had already predetermined for my life. What I wear, what I eat, how do I get promoted? How do I succeed? How do I get an award? How do I take leave? If I need legal help, I know where to go. If I, it was all right there. And suddenly, this process or this part of my life where my personal life and my professional life were deeply intertwined, it was ripped away from me. And now I got to figure it all out. I got to tell y'all, I had no idea what to wear to work. Like, what do regular people wear to work? Networking. What do you mean? What is a networking? That's not standing in the parking lot talking to my officer, my soldiers. Like, that's not what networking is. Like, you are learning how to fit into greater society, and you're understanding, wait, the military is my entire world, but I'm only less than 0.01% of everyone else. And so I'm now going into the world that I do not understand and a world that does not understand me. I'm stigmatized. I only see the first time I saw G.I. Jane, I was like, thank God that's a woman in the military that you can actually see performing duties, actually preparing for combat. And so there's just so much I think that you are overcoming through media, through stereotypes and notions, through people that you encounter, folks who ask you, have you killed anyone? And they do this at dinner. And so trying to overcome that while trying to find your place in the world because you were given a mission and you were given something to go after. And now I have to create this for myself. It was quite a leap for me to now have to find my team, my tribe, and my community to figure out what am I going to do. Talladega Nights, what do I do with my hands? Will Ferrell, like I didn't know what to do with my hands. And so you literally have to reinvent yourself while rebuilding the broken pieces, which is why relationships with the VA and relationships with this organization are so important because you honestly do not know where to start, where to begin, or where you're going. So yeah, it was tough for me. I smile and laugh now, but I thought I was gonna, you go backpacking through Europe and stay there, and hopefully find myself with some monks in the mountain, for sure.
Well, let me, before I move to my next question, let me just say thanks to both of you, Mary and Caity, for your service. It's much appreciated and thank you. So let me, if I can, again, something you mentioned there at the end is sort of where do people start? Where do they go? One place where people often go is to the women veterans in particular in LA, is the Women's Mental Health Program at the Long Beach VA. So I'm wondering, Dr. Napier, if you can share with our listeners and those who are watching this, a little bit about that. What is that program? How does it work? What does it do?
Sure. Well, it's kind of a collection of programs. So we have gender specific providers at both the PCMHI and the BHIP level. So that is primary care when you're first going to see your physician for a checkup or what have you, and you share that you maybe are feeling a little bit down, you're experiencing baby blues or whatever the case may be. They can connect you to a provider right then and there with a warm handoff. And that provider is a gender specific provider that has expertise in gender specific and gender sensitive care. The BHIP level is our general outpatient level. And so this is for veterans who there might be something a little bit more to it. So they might be seeking out more extensive individual psychotherapy, group therapy, or a combination of the two. So we've actually taken a more integrative approach, and we have gender specific providers embedded in different teams and clinics. So that would be our substance use clinic, that would be our general outpatient clinic, and what have you. And there is a gender specific space, so a physical space at the hospital in a beautiful new shiny building with an entrance that is right next to the office. And so our women veterans can literally park and then walk about 10 or 15 steps and be right inside the lobby or the clinic with their provider. And not only is their provider a woman, but the MSA, so that your scheduler, the person who checks you in, is a woman as well. We try to be very thoughtful about this. And there's also restrooms right there. We also have spaces for folks who are nursing and they have to bring their children with them for some of their care. We try to be very thoughtful around what this environment looks like and just imagining what the experience might be like to come to this building. We don't know your story right off the bat, but we want to make sure that you make it inside the door. And so that's reflective of many VAs throughout the VA, not all of them, but certainly at the main hospital in Long Beach.
Wait, can you talk a little bit, and this was alluded to in some of the opening comments that folks gave, but there are a number of these veterans I assume you're seeing are dealing with trauma of various sorts. And so how is that showing up for them? What sorts of traumas are you seeing? How does it impact their willingness or their capacity to engage with assistance, to seek assistance? So what are you seeing on that front?
Well, first, let me say that I love working with our women veterans. By far, I've had different roles within VA, and it's my favorite thus far. Our women veterans usually are seeking out therapy, where other veterans maybe have to be nudged a little bit, or or a lot of it. And so they're actually seeking it out. And it's also reflective of culture right now, which is very mental health focused. So there's a bit more of an avenue and an openness, destigmatization, where we're seeing them enter the doors a little bit more so. With respect to trauma, most of the time we're thinking about complex PTSD, so multiple traumas, traumas of a sexual nature that are chronic. We see our women veterans perhaps have experienced trauma throughout childhood, and then they go off to the military hoping for something different, a sense of community, and then are re-traumatized once they're in the military. And so they come out with that compounded experience, and then maybe again might experience things like interpersonal violence or other challenges. And so seeing a veteran with trauma is not atypical of my day. With respect to military sexual trauma, which speaks to both assault and harassment, that's about 1 in 3 of our women veterans who show up in the door. But I find anecdotally that I think that statistic is probably much higher. And this is just the data that we get. I think we could do probably more work in advocacy to make sure that we have those women veterans responding to these questionnaires, to all the different ways that we seek out data so that we can get more updated information. But that's typically what it looks like. And then when it comes to care, it's both on an individual level. So we might do anything from like a 60 to a 90-minute treatment. Some are going to be more mind-body focused. Some are going to be more centered on homework and things like that, but also group treatment. And I find that to be the most valuable experience. Most of our veterans are struggling with trust, being in social environments. And so the treatment for that would be to be around other people and to see that you could have a safe experience, that you could have a different story, and that it might look a little bit differently from what it did before. And so I find that to be one of the most healing experiences to witness and also to facilitate.
That's great. It's promising to hear that you're finding women veterans in particular willing to seek out assistance and looking at that's really positive.
Oh, absolutely. I not only willing, but they're knocking down the doors. I really admire our women veterans because they're very spicy. They're knocking down the door. They're kicking down the door.
They're insisting on it.
They're insisting on it. Yes, and as they
As
should. They should. That's that's one of those the benefits that they receive as a result of their service. It's something that they're completely entitled to, and I, as a provider, try to advocate for them and that way as well. A challenge would be wait times, but during those wait times, we see those women, what's going on, is there a provider for this? And also being very specific about their care. They know they want a licensed provider. They know that they want them to do this type of treatment and whatnot. It's a very special experience to work with them.
Adam, I wanted to also say, Dr. Napier, it's a testament to you because one, you demonstrate empathy. I've never met you before, but I would want to come to you because it doesn't feel like I have to prove to you that what I experience is real or true. And so I will say it's no wonder women veterans are beating down the doors, because I will tell you, at first strike, as soon as I don't feel safe,
Oh, sure.
and I know I have to work with you, then not only am I not going to come back, but I'm going to tell my fellow women veterans, do not
Oh,
utilize
yes.
the entire clinic. The entire clinic gets the hit. And so kudos to you and professionals like you. I was sitting here smiling, and I was thinking, when we talk about all the skills that we would like our providers to have, we would like legal professionals to be aware of, we have to never ever skip over common decency and humanity and empathy
Oh,
and care,
of
because
course.
these are people who have already had to relive and retell these stories at least 20 times before they even come to you. So I just wanted to say kudos to you. And if I lived in LA, I would be beating down your door as well. So yeah.
Well, I so appreciate that. And I'll add to that, I think strong values for humility and kindness go really far, I think, for providers with our veterans that we work with. And just, I think I can specifically say for the gender specific providers that we are in awe of the women that we work with, and that makes for a very special relationship.
And I was just going to say, I use the San Francisco VA Women's Clinic for my healthcare, and it's, yeah, like they've also been, amazing, and it feels good as somebody doing legal work to be able to tell the veterans we're seeing, like, that the VA does have a women's clinic, and that like I use it too, and it's a place where like I go in and I know that people know why I'm there. They know that I'm a veteran. I'm not just at the VA because like my grandpa's sick or something. Like, it is a really unique and special space. So thank you as well.
Let me ask Amanda if you can jump in a little bit. I know Inner City Law Center focuses, mostly on housing stability, either for folks who are on the streets or precariously housed. How do you see some of the traumas, the PTSD, the military sexual trauma, other things playing out with respect to housing stability for women veterans?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've already touched on, that for most of our clients, it's complex, PTSD. It's more than just what they experienced, in the military. And the culmination of kind of all of those experiences, and by the time that, then how a lot of them would feel, just kind of left with nowhere to go, no direction. Um, they just kind of internalize and kind of stop trying to, there's too many decisions to make at once. And that a lot of times can end up in that position for much longer than they anticipated. And it kind of snowballs into, for a lot of our clients, homelessness and not being able to hold down a job. But I would say on the positive side of things, that same kind of sometimes getting those benefits or getting into, healthcare at the VA is that, starting block in the opposite direction. And for our women veterans in particular, kind of, it's the same thing. Like there's momentum. They're gonna start doing the work and really partner with us on these cases and want to be, housed, want to be, get the benefits, want to put in the work. And I think that part is really rewarding.
Can you talk a little bit, Amanda? I know one of the things we've seen in some of our cases is the health impacts of chemical exposure for women.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how that plays out?
Yeah, I think for attorneys in this field, I mean, this is some of the more complicated cases. In part, so many of these things, kind of what Mary spoke on, is that late diagnosis, right? Like we don't know the repercussions of so many things until decades after. But what we are seeing and what more and more women are coming in with is issues with infertility. I know Gulf War veterans have higher rates of early menopause, and this toxic exposure and chemicals and what that actually means for our hormones and endocrines. But for legal purposes, it's really complicated to try to get those service connected. I think we all can use common sense to understand how these things interact, but creating kind of the legal connection for these exposures and what they mean and the impact on women's health is significantly harder. Diagnosis and nexus. So those connections are just, the VA is not really up to date with how any of those things interact. And so for a lot of, women who come with, autoimmune conditions and just these things are really complex, kind of undetermined medical conditions, they're having a really difficult time in getting benefits or services related to those conditions. And it's maybe the most frustrating aspect, not only for them, but as an attorney, because you can see the connection. And it's like, if I can see the connection, I don't understand why it's so hard outside of that.
Thank you. Caity, one of the things I know we see is sort of significant disparities in care for women service members and afterwards. Can you talk a little bit about how those disparities sort of shape long-term health outcomes, both for women veterans and for transgender veterans as well, and particularly as it comes to sort of accessing consistent and affirming care as people push forward?
Yeah, I mean, like Amanda said, it's, not always easy to like prove that what someone's experiencing years later and how that relates to their service in order to service connect it. And one really dramatic example of like the impact of that we saw in 2025 was the restriction to gender affirming care at VA facilities. And so to be clear, the VA was not providing gender affirming surgery, but it was providing hormone replacement therapy as well as pre and post op counseling. And so when the policy became more restrictive last year, what it said was that in order to continue to get hormone replacement therapy at the VA, you had to already be receiving it there, or you had to have been receiving it in the military while, like when you were discharged. And so what we know is that, if a trans veteran or trans service member is seeking that care somewhere else, just perhaps in a more affirming environment, maybe they are not trying to go through TRICARE while they're in the military. If there is a health clinic that is more welcoming, and that's where they've been getting their care. And so if they weren't receiving it through the military at the time of their discharge, they're not going to be able to go get that through the VA. And for people who are already out of the military, maybe they have an employer, sponsored health program that's providing that care right now. But, in the future, if they lose that job or if they change jobs or something, or it's a spouse or something like that, anything that changes, it seems like they're not going to be able to go back to the VA and get that care in the future. And like what we know is obviously, especially for people who've had gender affirming surgeries, they don't have a way to replace those hormones on their own. So this is like an actual really serious health impact by restricting access to hormones. And so all of that is now being predicated on service connection in a way that we were not seeing before 2025. And even for people who did qualify under the policy, there was a CAVC case in 2025 called CM v. Collins, Charlie Mike CM v. Collins, where the VA admitted that it had violated its own policy after it refused to continue filling a prescription for estrogen for a trans woman veteran at the VA. And so, this is still like obviously something that's evolving, but there is some concern about like what the effects of like this new heightened burden of service connection for gender affirming care is going to look like at the VA and for access. But it all does relate very directly back to service connection and what you can prove while you were in the military.
Thank you for that. We did get some questions from the audience before today, and I wanted Caity to ask you to maybe follow up on one of them. And it's something that folks have already talked on a bit. So I'm curious if you have anything additional to add. But the question is, how can the legal system and attorneys providing civil legal advocacy, excuse me, be sensitive to the needs and concerns of women veterans? In particular, what does trauma-informed lawyering look like in practice when serving women veterans?
Yeah, I loved this question. I'm also really excited to hear what other people have to say about this too, because I feel like there's going to be some strong opinions. But for me, I think, well, as a lawyer, I think the ultimate goal of trauma-informed lawyering is to create an environment for empowered decision making by your clients. And so that means that even though I am a veteran, I'm not leading with the assumption that I know what somebody's military experience was like. I don't assume that I know how they feel about it, and I don't assume that I know what their goals should be in why they are coming to me for legal help. And so instead, the goal is to provide information to help the client make the decisions that they want about the advocacy, even if it's to say, I don't want to do this right now. Everything from, yeah, I want to appeal. I was scared to ask for this thing, but now I'm ready to appeal it because now I understand, that I deserve better, all the way to the right to be like, I don't want to do this actually right now. I have too much going on. And so just to empower that process for the client wherever they are, and to not assume that like I know better than they do, really.
Great. Mary, question for you. The combat ban on women was officially lifted in 2013, but even before that, women were still serving in combat roles. How does that fact, or those facts affect women veterans sort of as they apply for VA benefits today?
Yeah, initially it means you get good street cred with the older veterans. So when you walk in a VA clinic and I might wear my hat and I have 4th ID, 4th Infantry Division, or 75th Field Artillery, or 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force, and And initially, of course, who's your father served, your brother served, your son served, your husband served? No, I served. And so there's a kind of this immediate camaraderie that happens in the VA space. I will say though, the challenge, if there are challenges, it does become when you engage with advocates or healthcare providers who rightfully so bring their own preconceived notions and or biases into the room. So for instance, I remember a particular day, had a VA healthcare appointment, particularly around psychology. I knew I needed to talk to a therapist. It's tough getting in the car, even going. I make it to the clinic. I see that I have a female provider. I am like, yes, that is one less barrier I have to face. I walk into the room. She's trying to understand why I have all these injuries. Why am I almost at 100% permanent and totally disabled? And she asked me about my experiences, and I just, briefly say, hey, I deployed twice to Iraq. First deployment was pretty tough. Second deployment, I'm just really happy I'm home. I won't complain because I'm better than most. That was my going line. And this woman says to me, I don't see why women even go into the military, especially war. Women just aren't cut out for it. I will tell you, Adam, I wish I dealt with it with much more maturity, but I swiped all of the things off of her desk. All the paper clips were over in the corner. Was not violent, but it was all I could do. It was kind of like I'm just tired. I walked myself out of the office and I walked myself out of that VA clinic and I never returned to that. It would be 5 years before I ever returned back to another VA clinic, despite the fact that I was dealing with depression, anxiety, and all the things. And I'm thinking that the same street cred that got me high fives and offers to get something to drink right outside in the waiting room was also going to garner some type of empathy, respect, awareness. And here I am, barely on the verge of wanting to live that day. And I have a provider, a woman provider, say to me, women shouldn't even be in the military. And so you have the contrast there where I'm struggling to stay involved in the system and want to access the benefits, despite the fact that I have to deal with people's humanity. And that's why having lawyers who are trauma informed or just informed that there are women who served in dangerous situations in the Gulf War, in Vietnam, in World War II. We just saw the 688 movie come out. They were doing mail, but they were doing mail in a war zone. And so just, people understanding that, hey, don't let the MOS or the job that you think a woman is doing in the military define her entire experience. You never know exactly what she did. So while I'm just a communications officer, I did telephones and satellites and computers. I did it with the warfighter, and I was always under fire, always under pressure. And the things that I experienced don't often make sense on paper until I explain. Yeah, I hooked up the computers on a rooftop with Marines while being shot at. It becomes very complex, but it definitely is a challenge to process. And unless I know people like you all exist on this panel, and that it is not every provider. That one woman doesn't define my whole experience. I would not be 100% permanent and total disability. I would not have those benefits. I would not have a handicap placard for my bad days when I can barely walk. I would not have a good therapist that I still call back in Georgia, who helped me through some really bad times. So yeah, street cred, but also fighting sometimes the biases and stereotypes that persist.
Thank you. Amanda, can you talk a little bit about the benefits that veterans are entitled to after their service? And in particular, are there benefits that are specific to women veterans?
Yeah, so I mean, there are benefits in theory, and there's what happens when folks actually get out, right? So there is entitlement to healthcare, to disability compensation, home loan, education benefits, employment, career support, vocational rehabilitation. Um, those things they exist right when you get out. Now, overcoming the hurdle to actually using those benefits and having them, at the full extent to which you deserve them is a different story. And especially for veterans who may have gotten a less than honorable discharge, right? Then most of their entitlement to any of that is just gone. And so, and even kind of going off of what Mary shared, that bad experience that a veteran has when they walk into the VA or interact with someone there, that can prevent them from getting any of those benefits for decades. And we've seen it time and time again that folks will come into our office and say, I tried to get benefits, but I was told I wasn't eligible. And they don't try again. They don't try again because they felt, humiliated or discouraged or angry or a bunch of other things. And now all of those benefits that they should have been getting and should have been receiving for years and years and years, they don't get until they're in their 60s. And um, it's things like that are extremely frustrating as an attorney, because the VA is the place that you're supposed to go to get connected to those things. It's not supposed to be the barrier to those benefits. And more often than not, what we see with our clients is the first stop is the barrier, until we can resolve it.
So, Caity, one of those barriers that Amanda mentions is for some benefits is the need to be service connected. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and how that can limit access to benefits in certain circumstances?
Yeah, and so for some context to that, when we talk about service connection, and I know we've talked about it a lot already, is like particularly for like a service connected disability, which is what one of those common benefits veterans are seeking. You generally have to prove three things. Something happened to me in the military. Something is causing me to be disabled now, and a doctor agrees that yeah, what's bothering you now is related to what was bothering you in the military. And so if you can't prove that service connection, that this relates in particular ways to your military service, I mean, which can be a really high burden of like point to where in your military record it says this happened, or else like you're not going to be able to get service connection. That is where it can be extremely consequential. And yes, there is comprehensive health care at a certain disability percentage, but in order to get to that, you do need to have enough service-connected disabilities to get there. Or even if you have less than 2 years of service, that service connection is going to be your primary way of accessing the VA, at all. And so, we've talked about how like now there's going to be this greater requirement for service connection to receive hormone replacement therapy as gender affirming care. Fertility treatments also require, service connection in order to receive. And, so that is where like, yeah, it can be determined, even if you are generally eligible for the VA, it can be very determinative of your access to healthcare, as well as just you're not going to be able to receive service connected disability compensation if it's not service connected. And what we see with like I think there was also a part about like housing programs with that, the VA like HUD-VASH program itself doesn't require service connection, but there are other housing programs that do, like the specially adapted housing grants that can help disabled veterans stay in their homes, and pays for things like wheelchair ramps and widening doorways, as well as special monthly compensation for housebound veterans or veterans who require aid and attendance, and all of these things that affect veterans' abilities to stay housed that do require service connection in order to use.
So, Caity, can you talk a little bit about why lawyers are important for that process? In my experience, lawyers often think it's obvious why lawyers are important, but a lot of other folks are like, hold on, why do you need a lawyer for that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, you get to play detective and look through people's records, and, veterans, why would we expect somebody who comes in saying, hey, these are my symptoms, to like know really, all of the ways in which the care they received in the military is or is not a symptom. And there is some work here where the VA is now supposed to consider, a claim for one mental health condition is supposed to be treated as a claim for all mental health conditions, for instance. But especially on the eligibility side, what I do a lot of is looking back for someone who got kicked out, is going back, who has a diagnosis now, going back and, making that argument that, a schizophrenia diagnosis or a bipolar diagnosis after service, that, some of the incidents that led to that discharge is itself symptoms of this mental health condition. And so that is where, having a lawyer, just having the familiarity with how the mental health side in the future can be used to the facts of their service, and applying that facts to law is one of the more fun parts of my job.
So Amanda, that process that Caity talks about can sometimes take a long time, and particularly when we have clients who are homeless when they come to us and struggling with that. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like? How, if we're serving folks for multiple years and they are literally on the streets or in a shelter during that time period, what does that look like?
Yeah, so it is incredibly frustrating because the reality is we shouldn't need lawyers in as many cases as we do. So many, I would say that, you know, in a perfect world, 75% of the clients we have shouldn't need a lawyer. It's not incredibly legally complex. It's just the VA is not doing what the VA is supposed to do to help the veteran be connected. It's really important to know that this system is created to be non-adversarial, which is why, there's not an attorney on the other side. The goal of this system is ultimately to connect veterans to benefits. It's supposed to be a proactive system where the VA is, all reasonable doubts are in favor of the veteran. Everything is supposed to be veteran friendly, but the reality is that's just not happening. It's not happening in practice. Um, Even more concerning is as of late, we are getting more and more severance issues. The VA actively going into cases and determining that reductions are needed, severing conditions. That's really concerning because that's not something that should be happening in this system, how it's created.
Can you
And
say what you mean, Amanda, by severing conditions?
yeah, so if someone is service connected for a condition and they're receiving those benefits, that should be, for the most part, the end all be all. They should receive those benefits for the rest of their life. Um, it is in a very, very rare occurrence in which that should be severed. The legal burden is exceptionally high in order to do so, but we are seeing, I mean, the increase has to be like 500%. I have never seen so many people in the last, 8 years of doing this come to us with a proposed severance from the VA, which means the VA is actively on their own going through to determine that someone should be given less benefits than they are already receiving and that they already earned and became entitled to and worked through this process. As you said, it's sometimes a years long process that they already worked through. And in one letter, that's at risk. And so it's a really big problem, especially when, so many of our veterans in particular are unhoused when we meet them. And the one thing that these benefits do is secure housing for them, right? $4,000 a month is something that even in LA, you can try to find housing and live. And that's, we can't understate that. And so for some of our veterans, you're now risking their homes by severing or reducing their benefits.
So, as the panelists know, I have a whole bunch of questions, and we're not going to get through them all, but I do want to jump to a few questions about the medical legal partnership that we have with the Long Beach VA. So maybe, Dr. Napier, can you start us off maybe, from your perspective as a doctor and a medical professional at the clinic? Can you talk a little bit about why it's important and how it works?
Yeah, I can share a little bit. So I think it's vital, as I shared before, just the experience of having someone to believe them, someone who matters. So our veterans look at attorneys as kind of like the epitome of what is the verbiage I'm looking for? Um,
We
uh,
won't be
uh,
offended.
no, no, it's okay. I'm not, and I'm also not a person has fears of offense too much, within a certain uh, limit. But in any case, I meant that it's really a helpful. It's very beneficial to have somebody who's not doesn't have a VA title, who's not in contract with the VA, not from, the Coast Guard or Army or, what have you, and to say, I believe you. And I've also got, all these little letters after my name because they've had
Yeah,
so
Dr.
many
Napier,
experiences.
a good faith broker. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. Thank you so much. Yeah, because there's so many times when our veterans have experienced those who have been in any position of power or who have had some sort of impact over their future, which is terrifying, right? To make a determination about, you were talking about housing benefits, especially when you have people who are depending on you. We've been talking about what that looks like as maybe a parent, or also sometimes we have other types of dependents, thinking about our sandwich generation who are also taking care of their parents in addition to their kiddos. There might be a lot on their shoulders. So it really matters to have somebody to say, you know what, I'm willing to sit down and I believe you. And speaking of sit down, whenever I've communicated with you all at ICLC, whomever has been the point of contact has been amazing. And they'll say, Dr. Napier, yeah, I'll come in office. I'll come down there. I'll go through the parking lot and we'll sit at the table and we'll go through the intake. Oh, they need virtual. Oh, we'll do that. And that flexibility has gone so far. On our end, it's actually been really easy for me. I'm talking to my women veterans. I'm asking them about certain things. And as soon as they say yes, it will be beneficial and they meet those criteria, I'm reaching out to my point of contact at ICLC. And not only that, and I don't know if you all want this out there, but you all have been so helpful because there have been times I've even consulted. And I said, I know this is a little bit out of the wheelhouse, but I really, really want to help this veteran. What can they do? And you all have given me a list of contacts and suggestions. And it's just been something really beautiful to see. So I've been very grateful. I've been very grateful as a provider, and I know the veterans have been.
It's been a great partnership from our end as well. Amanda, can you talk a little bit about why it's particularly useful from our end?
Yeah, I don't think we have enough time to really get into it because I could talk about this forever. Because from an attorney perspective, like having access to it's gold, right? Like there's nothing, so much of this relies on, medical determinations, on an opinion from a doctor. And without a client having a reliable practitioner, an engaging practitioner, the alternative is a 10 to 15 minute compensation and pension exam where the veteran goes, the VA orders it, they're meeting someone for the very first time who may or may not be a decent doctor. And the entire case relies on their medical opinion after a 10-minute visit with them. And as we talked about, a lot of our veterans aren't going to feel comfortable enough to open up to a complete stranger in that short time frame. They don't have the cultural understanding, the competency, and so for us, having access to medical providers is, I mean, night and day in terms of how quick service connection happens, the outcomes, how favorable, something that may be a 5-year appeal to get where it needs to be can be consolidated into a year and a half with the right pieces. And so I really can't understate it. There's some cases that, quite frankly, I don't know that we would have won without, a medical support letter or the partnership from, a doctor. And I think, the women's MLP is so unique. The experience that they have there is, it's something really special that a lot of our veterans need. And so I really can't say enough about how helpful it is, truly.
We're scheduled to end, I think, at 1:10. Is that correct, folks? What
For
time?
this portion, but yes, it goes till 1:30.
It
So
goes to 1:30, including the questions.
yes. Mhm.
Okay, great. I didn't know if I needed to transition the questions yet. Okay, I won't do that quite yet then. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit, if we can, about military sexual trauma in particular. That's something that was mentioned at the outset as something that, unfortunately, a lot of women vets have experienced and are dealing with. And you gave some statistics in terms of what you've seen, Dr. Napier, already, and your sense that it's even more widespread than what you've seen. I'm wondering, Caity, if you can talk a little bit about how you prove such claims. What are the challenges with that? How do veterans and their advocates go about addressing that?
Yeah, and fortunately, the VA recognizes, like the regulations recognize that the majority of MST survivors do not report the assault or harassment during their service. And so while you can certainly prove MST if you do have a report in your service records, that is not required in order to prove, in order to service connect your claim. And that's something even people I've served with, it's very daunting to them because they think they need to present this whole case. And that is not necessarily how that works. What they will do instead is we, as lawyers, will go through service records and look for what we call markers or F5 markers. And that refers to 38, like chapter 38 of the Code of Federal Regulations, section 3.304 F5, which is whether they list like the other ways that you can prove that an MST occurred. And so along with the veteran's statement about their experience, we also can look at the other things in their records that can corroborate other parts of what they're reporting. And so if a veteran, goes and is treated for, gets an STI exam after, an assault or a pregnancy test, those are things that can be used to corroborate the MST occurred. Other examples are changes in behavior. So if a veteran is serving without incident and suddenly they're getting written up for poor grooming or missing PT, they're not getting up in the morning, these kind of like depressive, traumatic symptoms, that can be used to prove like this sudden change in behavior that is explained by having suffered an assault. Other statements by people who are around. And so rather than requiring veterans to prove the assault itself, you can also prove that they experienced the after effects of it that are more likely to be in their service records than evidence of an actual MST.
And
Dr. Yeah, please jump in.
so sorry. I just wanted to add a piece to that in case it's really relevant for anybody who's listening today. So MST is an experience. It's not a diagnosis. It speaks to, as we talked about, harassment or assault. But when you come in to see someone like me, so a psychologist working NVA, it's a very separate experience from proving a claim. And so sometimes I've had veterans come into my office and wanting to, prove that it really happened. And I'm like, what are we doing? Of course I believe you. So it's relevant for anyone who might be in the audience. You don't have to prove it in office. It's not related to your claim. If you've experienced MST, even if you've had a dishonorable discharge, you don't qualify for any other type of VA care, you likely still can receive care. And even if there are challenges with your record, silence in a record is not an absence of trauma. So I just wanted to highlight that in case it gets mixed up for anybody.
That's great. So we're going to move to questions in a moment, but before we do that, can I ask each of you to share with our audience what you think they should be thinking about, right? These are issues that they care about, and not just what they should be thinking about, what they should be doing. How can they help to serve women veterans, to support women veterans? What does that look like? What would you encourage our audience to do, and how should they approach things? Who wants to jump in on that first?
I could jump back in. What I would recommend to most folks are, to give control to the veteran. So when you're working with someone, give them the control over pacing, being very transparent about why you're asking certain questions, not asking for unnecessary details. And I think that might be a human reaction when you hear something to want to ask a follow-up. But if it's not necessary, that could lean towards re-traumatizing, using the veteran's language. So if they describe it as the thing that happened or an assault, when able, to allow them to use that language, and you reflect that in your language as well. And lastly, I would say also keep sort of a boundary. So if you notice that the veteran is going deeper into the story beyond what has been planned for that specific meeting, maybe even at the outset saying there may be times when I'll redirect you, just to make sure that, both we stay on pace, but also to respect your journey, because I'm here with you for an hour or however much time. And I know that once we leave, you may be left with some residual thoughts and feelings and things like that. And I want to make sure that we are very sensitive to that. So being thoughtful in that way.
I want to expand a little bit on that as well, because that's the same, general consensus that I was going to say, is that, it's really important that I think, a lot of times you feel like, oh, well, I want to help and I can connect you to all these things, right? But I think it's really important to let them be the keeper of the timeline of the story, of the experience, so even if you think they might, and not even from a legal standpoint, but if you're like, oh, wow, this person can really benefit from, disability benefits, but if they're not ready to do that process, it's not useful to push them towards it. And so just, be there to support and like let them, give them the information. And if they want to go a certain direction, go with them, right? But be really cognizant, especially of, control and allowing them to kind of own what help they do want and, support them in whatever decisions they're making along the way.
If I can just add for folks before we hear from you, Caity, if for folks who want to make a comment on something to the larger group or share something with the larger group, the chat is only going to the panelists. So you want to put it in the Q&A, and then we can share it with the larger group if there's something you want to say. But go ahead and jump in, Caity.
Yeah, and I was going to say just also continue to support the existence of women's veterans visibility and like culturally, last year we saw an attempt to eliminate women veterans specific social media accounts through the federal government, and that was fortunately stopped. There was a process of erasing, historical articles about the different firsts, especially that were caused by like, women service members, Black service members, just continue to support the need for, having our stories told. And, I think just right now preserving that, understanding why it's important, is something that people can do even outside of a professional space.
And lastly, I was just going to hop in and say the more obvious, it is partnerships like this organization with the Long Beach VA Clinic. It is being very intentional, whether you're a provider or representing an organization, about partnering where the women veterans are. There was a comment that came in that spoke about the impact of a lot of challenges from the military as veterans on dependents. So oftentimes, me as your spouse or your brother or your sister or your grandmama can help influence you to finally go speak to someone about the challenges you have. My stepfather is a Korean War veteran. He didn't get any of his benefits until he was 85. You know why? Because I found what would now be a DD 214. I took it and I filled it out. And one day, my daddy saying, "Thank you, baby girl. I'm getting benefits. I can get my eyeglasses now." But he trusted me. He did not trust the government one on one, but he trusted me. So I would say, even in your organizations, even if it seems more obvious that women veterans are welcome, this event, having something where women veteran issues will be discussed. Now, people, I'm sure there of the 85 or so people who were here, there are folks who've taken down all of our names because now we're trusted, and ICLC will be a trusted provider in the community for women veterans because you were intentional about creating this space. So the more obvious answer is partner where women will be, because I guarantee you there are women veterans there. Partner where their families will be, because I guarantee you they are the influencers in their household. And be really intentional about creating these spaces so people know it's not just lip service. You don't just have it on your website, but you actually do. You are actually really intentional about how you serve women and recognizing their unique issues.
Great. So let's share. I'll share some of the questions that we've gotten from the audience here. We're not going to have time to get through all of these, but and maybe Mary, we can stick with you for this one to start. What difficulties does gender play in women getting something other than an honorable or general under honorable discharge?
Oh, wow. And I will just be very, very frank and anecdotal, and I'll ask for Caity or Dr. Napier to hop in or any of the other panelists. But I will say that it really depends, especially for women who may have served in more combat heavy unit or units had predominantly men. I've seen, and I've also personally experienced some challenges in how I was discharged related to me talking about some of the more negative experiences. Let me make them more plain. If I felt as if I was not promoted or I was given the runaround when I had a medical board to evaluate my injuries post deployment, and I spoke up about it. And I was recommended for a general discharge despite the fact that I had a spotless record. I had to fight to get the right discharge to reflect. But because of my experiences and me daring to speak up about how I was treated and knowing that it was directly related to me being a woman in an all male unit, I was castigated and it was hard. I literally had a staff judge advocate, a woman, a lawyer who advocated on my behalf. And but it is very difficult. And because of the pressure, right? Because you'll be told you're letting down your unit, you're a traitor. How could you do this? The commander's a good person. Why would you put them in a bad position? You stop sometimes fighting for yourself. You stop fighting for what's right. And you don't speak up and speak out. And so, yeah, it can absolutely negatively impact how much you advocate for yourself while in the military and post-military as well. I will say the asterisk though is some of the most hard-charging fighters and advocates for me in the military and post-military were white men. So people who did not look anything like me, but had daughters and had sisters that they were close to. So I want to say that too. While I do have some negative tales of my experiences, do not let differences in gender blind you to people who are just trying to do the right thing and want to be good advocates. So that's what we got to look for, sisters in arms. We got to look for the people who are the angels who are doing the right thing.
And to the intersectionality of a lot of these issues, which goes to another question that was just popped up, which is, can one of you also speak to the impact of race on discharge status? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Caity, you had some stats, but we know the VA had to come clean about discharge
Yeah,
records
I
and
mean,
yeah.
absolutely, that if being any, is particularly among Black veterans have a higher risk, and when they join the military, of being discharged less than honorably. Right now there's still an ongoing fight within the VA about the denial rates that this was even being considered for VA disability compensation, and the fact that Black veterans were being there's still an ongoing lawsuit that is being argued, and they're trying to get it outside of the federal circuit and trying to get it heard elsewhere about that exact issue, and arguing that this doesn't deserve to be heard within the VA's own legal system, because it is in fact like a civil rights issue outside of the VA process itself, and that this process, in the entire process in fact, was was targeting Black veterans. And so, yeah, absolutely. It is, the statistics are very clear about the rates of Black veterans and that are discharged less than honorably, and how that carries over into their access to VA benefits, as well as just issues about how pain is treated, based on race and things like that, that carry over into the disability evaluations and the ratings that people perceive. So.
Amanda,
Absolutely.
there's another question that's along these lines that maybe you can jump in on. It says, can you please discuss how to get an upgrade from other than honorable discharge? What's the process around that? How does somebody go about that?
Yeah, so I mean, there's two different process. You could get a discharge upgrade directly through the DoD. That I wouldn't recommend at this point and with this administration currently. It's going to take longer, and we lately, I don't know, Caity, if you've seen kind of some of the decision we're getting are a little bit questionable from the DoD for discharge upgrades. But I would say the first pathway you should take is through the VA, a character of service determination. To put it really succinct, you should create, tell your story, because if you don't, write it down and you kind of explain what happened, the VA is just going to go off of your records. And as we've all talked about through this thing, the records don't share what your experience was. There's going to be a lot of gaps. So make sure you fill in all of those gaps for them. I would say request your records, go through them. And make sure that you, when you apply, you say that you are interested in a character of service determination. Partner, if you do have access to VA healthcare or any other healthcare, it'd be really helpful if you can partner with your doctor to talk about how your military service impacted your mental health and the implications of that, because that would be your strongest piece of evidence on your own, is if you could get a support letter kind of from a doctor connecting all of these things.
Great. I'm just seeing in the chat we have a nice. I always appreciate it when our clients weigh in from Inner City Law Center, and somebody weighed in saying I won my case with ICLC. I'm very happy with how it was handled with ICLC and their staff. So that's always great to see from our end. That's why we do this. So it's great. Um, so it's a pretty general question, and we've talked about some of this already, but I think it's worth maybe lifting up again and having folks weigh in on, to the extent there's anything that hasn't been said or anything people want to reiterate. The question is, if our legal aid organizations do not have funding for veteran-specific assistance, how else can we help women veterans? And I know a number of your answers have already touched on that, but anything additional folks want to add on that or highlight that's already been said? Or have we already answered that?
I mean, you could write to city council or different organizations to ask for funding. Let our elected officials know that this is something that you want funded.
Yeah, the other thing I would lift up, Amanda, is sort of what you said a moment ago about, where are we meeting our clients? Where are we going? Who are we connecting with? Because even if we're not doing VA specific work, right, there are women veterans who need help with evictions, need help with other sorts of benefits, need help with consumer issues, all the stuff that legal aid works on. And so being deliberate about where we're going to get our clients and making sure we're connecting with women vets, even if it's not veteran specific issues, but we're just serving veterans.
Spot on, Adam, because what we do know is that women are less likely to self-identify as veterans.
Hmm.
So if you're going to the places that have the challenges, there is a women veteran in that crowd. And so if you become a trusted provider, a trusted resource, a trusted person to them, they will eventually identify, oh yeah, I just happen to be in charge of controlling nuclear devices on a submarine. What? And here it is. You're just thinking you're talking to Nancy, who bakes really good sugar cookies on Sunday, right? And so, to your point, Adam, yes, women don't self-identify until we feel safe. And when we feel safe, we know we'll be respected, and then we'll start to share those parts of our stories and our lives. So yeah, go to where we are, and you will find those who have served in uniform.
And even just asking, have you ever served in the military can make a difference. People maybe have walked into a VA and shown a DD 214 with a less than honorable discharge to somebody at counter and been told, like, no, you're not a veteran or something. That is not an eligibility decision by the VA. Like you can apply for that, and so there are people also who genuinely don't think that they are veterans, and when they just don't know how we're using that term. So one way to open that door is to just say, have you ever served in the military? And you might get a different answer too.
Thank you, Caity. Another question is, has there been any effort to ensure that potential female recruits understand how prevalent sexual assault is in the military?
I have heard that there's videos, but that seemingly would happen after. So I don't know if there's any discussion ahead of time about that, but um, I've been told by clients that there are videos that, are supposed to give them tools and resources on what to do if they were to experience MST. But for very obvious reasons, just because those tools or resources exist doesn't mean that people feel safe to utilize them.
Yeah, I would agree. Just jumping in, my work is after the fact, clearly, but I've heard similarly, but I'm also thinking developmentally. A lot of these women were 18, 19. I usually joke with my patients and say, when I was, you were off and, combat or whatever you were doing. And when I was that age, I was like calling my mom to figure out where something was at the grocery store. Like,
Mhm.
just the developmentally, a lot of these veterans, I don't even know if you can completely take it in all the way if there's a video to know how relevant that might be perhaps to your experience. Is this a realistic threat? So I do think there's merit to the question, and are we preparing these women for potential experiences?
So another question. I noticed a large amount of the women that seem to be maintaining the recovery community are veterans that found their sobriety in VA facilities. My question is, are there any similar civilian recovery programs that follow the model? Are there any statistics that show the success rates of these various treatment services? Anybody able to answer that?
Is the question, are there civilian services that are centered in dual diagnosis for women veterans? Is that essentially?
That's what it sounds like. Yep, to me.
Yes, oh, certainly, of course. Now, when it comes to specifically the veteran population, I do think that's a little bit more niche, but I can even say that within VA, we often partner with our community care providers. So those individuals and groups that are licensed and contract with the VA, but don't necessarily work for the VA. That is, they treat civilians all on their own, even without getting our veterans. And we have a number of gender specific clinics that offer wonderful, I mean, they're galloping on horses in Malibu as they, pursue their dual diagnosis treatment. And, one way, if you're curious about that, every VA has a women's mental health champion. I happen to be the women's mental health champion for the Long Beach VA healthcare system. But part of our role is consultation, both for staff and for veterans. And I welcome any calls or correspondence if there's a question about something like that.
Great. One last question here, which is and Mary, you already answered this in the chat. Feel free to add to it, but I'm wondering if other folks have additions. For advocates seeking to learn more about women veterans' experiences and perspectives to better assist in our representation, do the panelists have any recommended readings or other suggestions? And Mary, you lifted up Ashley's War as something folks should look at. Do people have other suggestions or thoughts?
I'll throw in there's a number of books, but even film. The most recent movie on the 6888, the first African American woman unit of soldiers that served in World War II. We saw them portrayed in the Tyler Perry film. I think Kerry Washington was the star, the lead actress there. But when we talk about access to benefits, like many of those women did not come home and have access to GI Bill benefits. They could not get housing. They could not use it for education. And that intersected both race and gender. And so a lot of the fight for those real heroes and sheroes like that have intersected what we're talking about even now. So even though it is really around the integration or desegregation of the military as it pertains to race and gender, if you want to really look at the experiences of women and how it's progressed from there up until now, where we're looking at women veterans issues, it is a really good place to start. Ashley's War, really good post 9/11 account of women and their experiences in combat and post. And it really forces you to wrestle with what you think about women and their service in the military and what it really is, their reality, right? So I encourage both of those. And G.I. Jane, just because it's cool. It's just a really cool movie.
So let me read a chat we just received maybe to close us out, because I think it highlights that if nothing else, if for no other reason, this panel has been worthwhile from my perspective. It's been worthwhile in a lot of ways, but if nothing else, this comment would capture that. Thank you for this webinar. I'm a woman veteran myself who has been afraid to seek out help from the VA. I now feel safe and will be visiting the LBVA, the Long Beach VA, for assistance and sharing with my fellow women veterans. So kudos to all the panelists, I think, for really living and evidencing every day the spirit that you said we need to bring to this work. Really meeting, veterans, women veterans in particular, where they are, being empathetic, not walking in with a bunch of assumptions, but really walking into, to serve as best we can the folks who have served us. So thank you to all the panelists. Really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your advice for everybody here. Until the next time, thank you so much for everybody who attended.